What does it mean to take communion unworthily, or the Lord's Supper unworthily? In our passage that we looked at this week, we saw Jesus institute the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, communion, all of those refer to the same event. And we saw at the table that Jesus really transforms what greatness is and how that works. But we didn't have a lot of time in the message to actually look at what are some questions that we have about communion. And as a pastor, one of the questions that I've gotten a lot over the years is, what does it mean to take communion unworthily? And have I ever been guilty of doing that? Well, that language of taking communion unworthily, it comes from a letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthians. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now, Paul is writing to the Corinthian church to address a whole host of problems that they have in that church. In a lot of ways, Corinth is a very messed up church. One of them that he writes to address, one of the problems that he's addressing, is this issue of them taking communion unworthily. And what we have to understand is a bit of the context of what was happening. So, believers, when they gathered to take communion, it wasn't just a part of a worship gathering like we do it today, but it was a part of a broader meal. They actually sat down to a meal together, and communion was a part of that meal. And what Paul seems to be addressing here is that people are coming to this meal that's supposed to be about following Jesus and honoring him and the unity that he's created in this new family of believers, and they're getting drunk there. Some of the people who are wealthier, Paul says, are coming early and they're actually eating all the food, or they're bringing their own food, and people who are arriving late don't have anything to eat. This is just a picture of disunity, of superiority, and all of that is what Paul is referring to when he says you're taking the Lord's Supper unworthily. You're taking this thing that's supposed to be about a picture of humility, of service, of unity, and you're making it all about yourself and actually disobeying Jesus and getting drunk and having this disunity. So for us to take the body and blood of Jesus unworthily is to fail to see that we all have come to him in desperate need of forgiveness. And I think this is where sometimes people can get confused, as they think, well, if I have sin in my life and I come to take communion, is that taking it unworthily? And I just want to assure you that quite the opposite, that we come to communion to be reminded of our need for the forgiveness of sins. That Jesus has poured out his blood as his new covenant for the forgiveness of sins. So bring your sinfulness, bring your brokenness to the table, and do that in unity with your brothers and sisters, and find our identity in this meal together. So this is what is at the core of it, the forgiveness of sins. But to take it unworthily means to come in this place of disunity and superiority. Well, I'm sure you have a lot more questions about communion and different ways that's practiced, maybe in different traditions and how often, and Protestant versus Catholic. We'd love to hear more of your questions. So if you want, just add those in the comments here, and we'd love to respond to any questions you have about communion. Thanks so much for being a part of this journey with the Formed Life with us. We're so glad you're following along.